What's the price of humiliation? For one man, it was a steak dinner. For his ex-wife, it was the cost of every single meal in a five-star restaurant. This isn't just a story about revenge. It's about a woman left with nothing who rebuilt an empire in silence. It's about a man so blinded by his own arrogance, he couldn't see the titan standing right in front of him. He told her she couldn't afford her meal. So, in an act that silenced an entire room and shattered a man's ego, she bought the entire restaurant for the night. Katherine Pierce traced the rim of her water glass, the condensation a cool, grounding sensation against her fingertips. Outside the panoramic window of her corner office, the Seattle skyline glittered a sprawling kingdom of glass and steel under a bruised twilight sky. This view, 28 floors up, had cost her everything she was, and in return had given her everything she had ever wanted. It was her sanctuary, the physical manifestation of a victory no one else knew she had won. 3 years. It had been 3 years, 2 months and 11 days since she had last seen Jonathan Caldwell, the man who had meticulously and methodically dismantled her life piece by piece, convinced he was doing her a favor. He had called her his beautiful, unambitious project, a lovely decorative object that was becoming too expensive to maintain. Their ending hadn't been a dramatic explosion, but a slow, corrosive burn. Jonathan, a senior analyst at a prestigious venture capital firm, worshipped at the altar of financial growth. His world was quantified in market caps, quarterly earnings, and the polished gleam of a new German sedan. Katherine, on the other hand, had found her passion in quieter things. She was a coder, a developer, but her projects weren't the disruptive tech bro fantasies Jonathan chased. She was building an idea, a platform she called Terra Verde, designed to connect consumers with verifiably sustainable and ethical businesses. Jonathan had scoffed. A charity project, Kate. People want cheap and fast, not artisanal kale and guilt-free coffee mugs. There's no money in saving the planet. The money is in selling them, the planet, packaged and branded. His words, meant to be pragmatic, were tiny, sharp cuts. He saw her passion as a liability. When his promotion to vice president loomed, the pressure intensified. He started bringing home colleagues, men with sharp suits and predatory smiles. Katherine, in her comfortable jeans and with code snippets still swirling in her head, felt like a foreign object in her own home. The final conversation had happened in their sterile white kitchen, a space designed by an architect Jonathan admired. "It's not working, Kate," he'd said, not looking at her, instead straightening a set of ludicrously expensive Japanese knives in their magnetic block. "What's not working? The Wi-Fi I can rebo us." He cut in his voice, flat, devoid of emotion. It was the voice he used for a bad investment. "I'm looking at my 5-year plan, my 10-year plan. You're a rounding error. I need a partner who elevates my profile, who understands the game." Brittany does. Brittany, the sleek blonde marketing executive from his office. A woman who spoke in buzzwords and whose laughter sounded like tiny jingling bells of condescension. Katherine had felt the floor drop out. "You're leaving me for a 5-year plan." He finally turned to her, and his eyes held a look of profound, pitying disappointment. "I'm not just leaving you, I'm setting you free. You can go run your little computer club without having to worry about keeping up appearances." He gestured around the multi-million-dollar condo. "This isn't your world, Kate. You were never comfortable here. You'll be happier." The divorce was swift and brutal. His lawyers were sharks. They argued she had contributed nothing of monetary value to the marriage. Her work on Terra Verde was dismissed as a hobby. She walked away with a pittance, her personal belongings, and a single conceded asset, her small art collection. Jonathan had laughed at it. "Take your sad little paintings. Maybe you can sell one to buy groceries." She had crashed on her friend Chloe's couch for 6 months, the shame a physical weight. Every night she'd stare at the ceiling, Jonathan's words echoing in her mind. "You'll never make it without me. You don't have the instinct for survival. But as the weeks turned into months, shame curdled into fuel. She poured every waking hour into Terra Verde. She lived on instant noodles and cheap coffee, her world shrinking to the glowing screen of her laptop. She took on freelance coding gigs to pay for server space, her fingers flying across the keyboard with a desperate, furious energy. And then the breakthrough. It came from the very thing he'd mocked. One of the sad little paintings was an early work by an obscure artist named Lena Petrova, whom Catherine had believed in. A documentary on a streaming service suddenly thrust Petrova into the international spotlight, and the value of her early works skyrocketed. Catherine's sad little painting sold at auction for nearly $500,000. It was the seed money she needed. It was poetic karmic justice. She didn't buy a fancy car or a new wardrobe. She hired two of the best developers she knew, rented a tiny office, and poured every cent into making Terra Verde not just functional, but flawless. The app launched quietly 6 months later. For a month it was crickets. Then a popular eco-influencer discovered it. Her post went viral. The story of a platform that cut through corporate greenwashing resonated. Downloads surged. Businesses, big and small, clamored to be vetted for inclusion. Within a year, Terra Verde was the gold standard. Within 2, it was a tech unicorn valued at over $1 billion, and Katherine Pierce, its anonymous founder and CEO, was one of the most powerful new players in the industry. She kept her profile low, using a pseudonym for most public-facing communications. She hadn't wanted the fame. She'd wanted the success. She wanted to build the thing he said was worthless into an empire he couldn't even fathom. Tonight was a celebration. Terra Verde had just closed a landmark deal, acquiring its largest competitor. It was a monumental achievement. Chloe had insisted she go out. Go somewhere expensive and absurd, she'd urged. Go to Aria Ristorante, order the truffle pasta, and laugh at how you used to count pennies for ramen. So here she was, alone in a simple but elegant black dress, ready to have that truffle pasta. She wasn't looking for ghosts. She had long since buried them. But she had forgotten that in a city, even one as large as Seattle, ghosts have a way of finding you. Aria Ristorante was everything it promised to be, an exercise in opulent restraint. Low, warm lighting glinted off polished mahogany and crystal glasses. The air hummed with the quiet confidence of old money and the boisterous laughter of the newly minted. A soft, live piano melody trickled through the restaurant, a gentle counterpoint to the clinking of silver on porcelain. Catherine felt a genuine smile touch her lips for the first time that evening. Chloe was right. This was nice. A world away from the takeout containers and board meetings that had consumed her life. She had ordered a glass of Barolo and was studying the menu, savoring the feeling of unapologetic indulgence, when a familiar grating laugh cut through the sophisticated ambience. Her blood ran cold. It couldn't be. Not here. Not tonight. She slowly, reluctantly lifted her head. And there he was, Jonathan Caldwell, holding court at a prime table near the center of the room. He was heavier now, a prosperous paunch straining against the buttons of his tailored shirt. His hair was thinner, but he compensated with an air of unshakable self-importance. And clinging to his arm, looking like a high-fashion mannequin, was Brittany. Catherine's first instinct was to shrink, to become invisible, to ask for the check and flee. The old shame, the feeling of being judged and found wanting, washed over her in a sickening wave. She could feel his voice in her head again. "This isn't your world, Kate." But then something shifted. She wasn't the woman who had cried on her friend's couch anymore. She was the CEO of a billion-dollar company. She owned the building her office was in. This was her world now. She paid for it. She built it. With a deep breath, she straightened her spine, took a deliberate sip of her wine, and turned her attention back to the menu. She would not be chased out. Fate, however, had other plans. Jonathan, gesturing expansively, while telling some doubtlessly self-aggrandizing story, caught her eye. For a fleeting moment, confusion flickered across his face. He squinted as if trying to place a vaguely familiar servant. Then, recognition dawned, followed by an expression of utter comical disbelief. He nudged Brittany, murmuring something in her ear. Brittany's perfectly sculpted eyebrows rose as she glanced over her gaze, sweeping over Catherine's simple dress with dismissive speed before landing on her face. A slow, smug smirk spread across her lips. Catherine's stomach twisted. She knew what was coming. She braced herself. With a sigh that communicated he was about to perform a tedious act of charity, Jonathan excused himself and began to weave his way through the tables toward her. Each step he took felt like a drumbeat of doom. "Well, well, Catherine," he said, his voice a low, condescending boom that was just loud enough for the neighboring tables to hear. "I have to say, I'm surprised to see you here. This place is a little steep." He didn't greet her. He didn't ask how she was. He opened with an insult wrapped in feigned concern. The old Jonathan was alive and well. Catherine offered a cool, polite smile. "Jonathan, it's been a while." "It has," he agreed, his eyes roaming her table, noting she was alone. Celebrating something special. A new freelance gig, perhaps. The jab was obvious. He remembered her frantic, desperate hunt for freelance work just to stay afloat. You could say that she replied, her voice even. He leaned in conspiratorially, his cologne, the same overbearing, expensive scent she used to hate washing over her. "Listen, Kate, I'm glad you're treating yourself. I really am. But a word of advice from a friend," he said, using a term that was a lie on every level. "Don't get in over your head. The tasting menu here can run you close to a month's rent on whatever little place you've found. I'd hate for you to have an embarrassing situation when the check comes." The sheer, unadulterated arrogance of it stole her breath. He genuinely believed she was a charity case, a mouse who had accidentally wandered into the lion's den. The patrons at the next table, a well-dressed older couple, were now openly listening, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and discomfort. Catherine felt a flush of heat creep up her neck, not of shame, but of pure, unadulterated rage. It was a cold, sharp anger she hadn't felt in years. All the pain, all the humiliation, all his dismissive, cutting remarks from their past coalesced into a single blinding moment of clarity. "Thank you for your concern, Jonathan," she said, her voice dangerously quiet. "But I think I can handle it." He chuckled, a self-satisfied rumbling sound. Famous last words. "Look, if you get into a jam, just don't look my way. Brittany is trying to impress some clients of hers over there, and a scene would be terribly gauche." He gestured vaguely toward his table, where Brittany was now watching them with a look of bored superiority. He patted her on the shoulder, a gesture of patronizing finality. "Good to see you, Kate. Really. Try the bread. It's free." As he turned and walked back to his table, the smirk on his face was one of triumph. He had put the little woman back in her place. He sat down, and Catherine could see him recounting the conversation to Brittany, who let out that tinkling, cruel laugh. Catherine sat there motionless. The delicious Barolo now tasted like ash in her mouth. The beautiful restaurant felt like a cachouette. He hadn't just insulted her. He had tried to publicly humiliate her, to reinforce the narrative that she was nothing without him. He had assumed with all the confidence of a king that she was poor, struggling, and foolish. He thought she couldn't afford her dinner. An idea, wild and audacious, sparked in her mind. It was insane. It was theatrical. It was exactly the kind of move he would never in a million years anticipate. He thought she couldn't afford dinner. Fine. She would buy him his, and everyone else's too. The rage that had flared in Catherine's chest didn't dissipate. Instead, it cooled, hardening into a diamond-sharp resolve. Revenge, she had always thought, was a petty and corrosive pursuit. She had focused on success, on building a better life, believing that was the ultimate victory. But sitting there under the weight of Jonathan's casual cruelty, she realized that some wounds don't heal with silent success. Some wounds needed to be cauterized publicly and decisively. This wasn't just about Jonathan anymore. It was about the woman he had tried to break. It was for the Catherine who ate ramen and coded until her eyes burned, for the Catherine who had been told her dreams were a rounding error. This single grand gesture wouldn't be for him to see her wealth. It would be for her to reclaim her own story right here in the arena he had chosen. She watched him for a moment. He was laughing, holding up his wine glass in a toast. He felt powerful. He felt generous for having deigned to speak to her. The thought made her stomach clench. With newfound purpose, she subtly flagged down a passing waiter. "Excuse me," she said, her voice low and steady. "I need to speak with the restaurant manager, in private if possible." The waiter, a young man with attentive eyes, saw the seriousness in her expression and nodded. "Of course, madam. Right this way." He led her away from the main dining room toward a small, elegantly appointed office just off the kitchen. A distinguished man in his late 50s, with silver-streaked hair and an impeccably tailored suit, stood up from behind a large oak desk. His nameplate read, "Mr. Giordano, General Manager." "Good evening, madam. How can I help you? Is everything to your satisfaction?" he asked, his voice smooth and professional. Catherine closed the door behind her, granting them privacy. "Mr. Giordano, my evening has just become rather interesting. I have an unusual request." He gestured to a chair. "Please, at Aria we pride ourselves on accommodating the unusual." Catherine sat her hands clasped in her lap to still their trembling. "I want to pay for everyone's bill tonight. Every single table." Mr. Giordano's polite smile didn't falter, but his eyes sharpened with surprise. He had clearly heard requests for paying for a friend's table, or perhaps a special occasion group. But the entire restaurant? This was new. "The entire restaurant, madame." He clarified, his tone careful. "We are fully booked. That would be a substantial sum." "I'm aware," Catherine said calmly. "I would like you to calculate the total for every open check in the dining room right now. Food, drinks, everything. And then I would like you to add a 40% gratuity for your entire staff, from the chefs to the busboys. They are working hard and they deserve it." Now, for the first time, Mr. Giordano looked genuinely stunned. He leaned back in his chair, studying her. He saw no signs of mania or drunkenness. He saw a woman in a simple dress, with an aura of absolute seriousness. "May I ask the reason for this extraordinary act of generosity?" he inquired, his curiosity piqued. Catherine allowed herself a small wry smile. "Let's just say an old acquaintance reminded me of the importance of generosity. He was concerned I couldn't afford my own meal." She glanced through the small window in the door, her eyes finding Jonathan's table. "Specifically, the gentleman at table 12. I want to ensure his bill is most definitely covered." Mr. Giordano followed her gaze. He recognized Jonathan Caldwell, a regular, known for being a demanding customer and a mediocre tipper. A flicker of understanding and perhaps even amusement crossed the manager's face. The story was beginning to piece itself together in his mind. "I see," he said, a new warmth in his voice. "This is a fascinating request, Ms. Pierce," she supplied. "Katherine Pierce." She slid her card across the desk. It was the Terra Verde executive account. A sleek, black metal card with no spending limit. Mr. Giordano picked it up, his professional training keeping his expression neutral, but his eyes widened almost imperceptibly as he read the name. Katherine Pierce, Terra Verde. He was an astute businessman. He read the financial news. He knew exactly who she was, even if the public didn't. The anonymous, brilliant founder who had appeared out of nowhere. The story suddenly escalated from a personal drama to something legendary. He looked at her with newfound respect. "Ms. Pierce, it would be my absolute honor to facilitate this." He turned to his computer, his fingers flying across the keyboard. He summoned a senior waiter to bring him the physical check slips from every station to ensure accuracy. The office was silent for several minutes, broken only by the clacking of keys and the quiet rustle of paper. Catherine sat perfectly still, her heart hammering against her ribs. This was real. This was happening. Finally, Mr. Giordano turned back to her, a slip of paper in his hand. He looked at the number, then back at her, as if to give her one last chance to back out. The total, Ms. Pierce, including the 40% staff gratuity, comes to $27,481.59. Catherine didn't even blink. She just nodded. That's fine. Please run the card. He did. The machine whirred and beeped, spitting out a receipt. He handed it to her with a pen. As she signed her name, a signature now worth billions, he leaned forward slightly. How would you like this to be announced, Ms. Pierce? We can be discreet, simply informing each table as they request their check. Catherine thought for a moment. Discretion was for another time. This was a statement. No, she said, her voice firm. I want you to make an announcement. To everyone. I want you to say that an anonymous benefactor wishes for everyone to enjoy their evening and that all their expenses have been taken care of. And the gentleman at table 12, Mr. Giordano, asked, a hint of a smile playing on his lips. After the main announcement, Catherine said, I would like you personally to go to his table. Please present him with a bill for $0 and inform him that his ex-wife, Katherine Pierce, was especially keen to ensure he was well taken care of tonight, as she was worried he might have an embarrassing situation when the check came. She used his exact words, the petty, condescending phrase now weaponized and aimed right back at his ego. Mr. Giordano's eyes lit up. This was better than theatre. Madam, he said, with a slight bow of his head, the execution will be flawless. Catherine returned to her table, her movements calm and measured, a stark contrast to the thunderous beating of her heart. She felt a strange, heady mix of terror and exhilaration. She picked up her wineglass, her hand steady, and took a sip. From across the room, she could feel Jonathan's gaze on her. He likely assumed she had been complaining to the manager, perhaps trying to get a free dessert for some imagined slight. His expression was one of smug pity. He had no idea the tidal wave that was about to crash down upon his perfectly curated evening. A few minutes later, Mr. Giordano stepped into the center of the dining room. He stood with a relaxed posture, but his presence commanded attention. He tapped a small glass with a spoon, producing a clear, ringing chime that cut through the chatter. A hush fell over Aria Ristorante. Diners looked up from their conversations' forks, frozen midway to their mouths. A restaurant-wide announcement was highly unusual. Ladies and gentlemen, may I have your attention for just a moment? Mr. Giordano's voice was warm and resonant, filling the space. Aria Ristorante, thanks you for your patronage this evening. We have a small but rather unique announcement. He paused for dramatic effect. Catherine's eyes were locked on Jonathan. He was looking at the manager with an annoyed expression, as if his important conversation had been rudely interrupted. Tonight, Mr. Giordano continued, a smile in his voice. A fellow diner who wishes to remain anonymous has extended an extraordinary gesture of generosity. In the spirit of celebrating a personal victory, this benefactor has requested the privilege of paying for every single meal in the restaurant tonight. A collective gasp went through the room, followed by a wave of confused murmuring. People looked at each other, then at the manager, then back at each other. Was this a joke? A promotion, to be clear. Mr. Giordano said, his voice rising slightly to be heard over the buzz. Your entire bill, from the appetizers to the vintage wines, has been settled in full. There is no check to be signed, no card to be run. Furthermore, a generous gratuity has been left for the entire staff. Your evening is completely taken care of. The confusion erupted into stunned delight. A table of young tech workers whooped with joy. An elderly couple celebrating their anniversary looked at each other with teary, astonished eyes. Laughter and applause began to ripple through the room. It was a moment of pure, unexpected magic. Catherine watched the scene, a small, secret smile on her face. but her focus was singular. Jonathan. His face was a mask of utter bewilderment. He was looking around trying to spot the anonymous benefactor. He likely assumed it was some billionaire titan of industry, perhaps the man at the table next to him, a known shipping magnate. The idea that this gesture could have anything to do with him or the woman he'd just insulted was so far outside his realm of possibility, it didn't even register. Brittany was equally stunned, her eyes wide as she whispered frantically to Jonathan, "Who would do that? Is it a celebrity?" And then came the masterstroke. As the applause began to die down, Mr. Giordano began to walk, not back to his office, but directly toward table 12. He moved with the grace of a panther, a single folded bill receipt held delicately between his fingers. Jonathan saw him coming and straightened up, a flicker of understanding, the wrong understanding in his eyes. He thought the manager was coming to tell him, a valued regular, who the secret benefactor was. He prepared his face to look impressed. Mr. Giordano stopped beside their table. The patrons nearby, sensing a second act to the play, fell silent again, watching intently. Mr. Caldwell, the manager, said, his voice polite but carrying an edge of steel. "A special message for you." He placed the receipt on the table. It showed the itemized list of their expensive meal, the lobster, thermidor, the wagyu steak, the vintage champagne. And, at the bottom, in bold letters, it read, "Total $0, paid in full." Jonathan stared at it, confused. "Yes," you announced. "Someone paid for everyone." "Indeed, Mr. Giordano said, leaning in just enough for the surrounding tables to hear clearly. The anonymous benefactor made only one specific request. "She wanted me to personally deliver your receipt and to pass on a message." He paused, letting the words hang in the air. "She wanted me to inform you that your ex-wife, Ms. Katherine Pierce, was especially keen to ensure you were well taken care of tonight." The name hit Jonathan like a physical blow. His jaw went slack. His face, which had been flushed with wine and self-satisfaction, drained of all color, leaving a pasty grey pallor. His eyes darted wildly from the manager's face to Catherine's table across the room. She was watching him. She met his gaze, her expression perfectly neutral, and gave him a tiny, almost imperceptible nod, a nod of dismissal. Mr. Giordano delivered the final, crushing line. "Ms. Pierce was apparently concerned you might have an embarrassing situation when the check came. She hopes you enjoyed your dinner." A wave of snickers and sharp intakes of breath rippled through the nearby tables. The older couple, who had overheard Jonathan's initial condescension, now stared at him with open contempt. The story was complete. They had witnessed the setup and now the devastating punchline. Brittany looked back and forth between Jonathan's horrified face and Katherine, a dawning, horrified comprehension on her own. The woman her partner had just mocked and pitied as a penniless loser had just bought out one of the most expensive restaurants in Seattle for an entire evening. The social humiliation was absolute. Jonathan looked as though he had been struck by lightning. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He was a man who lived and died by status, by appearances. And in one fell swoop, Katherine had stripped him of all of it in front of his new partner, his clients, and a room full of his peers. She hadn't just proven him wrong, she had used his own arrogance as a weapon and annihilated him with it. The restaurant remained a theatre of Jonathan's humiliation. The initial buzz of excitement from the other diners had been replaced by a more focused, intense curiosity directed at table 12. Whispers were no longer about the free meal, but about the spectacular takedown they had just witnessed. "Did you hear? It was his ex-wife. He told her she couldn't afford it." The story spread through the room like wildfire. Jonathan sat paralyzed, his face a grotesque marble statue of shock. The receipt on the table felt like a death warrant for his ego. Brittany was fuming, her face tight with a fury born of pure social embarrassment. This was not the impressive power player evening she had envisioned. She was now part of a cautionary tale being whispered over dessert. For Catherine, the moment was surreal. The anger had subsided, replaced by a strange, hollow calm. She had done it. She had faced the ghost of her past and vanquished it. With a quiet grace, she placed her napkin on the table, stood up, and prepared to leave. She had no desire to gloat or to engage further. The act itself was the entire conversation. But Jonathan, jolted from his stupor by the sight of her leaving, finally found his voice and his legs. He scrambled to his feet, nearly knocking over his chair. "Kate." "Wait," he called out, his voice hoarse. He rushed toward her, intercepting her near the exit. His face was a desperate, pleading mess. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a raw, frantic panic. "What was that?" He hissed, his voice low and trembling. "What kind of sick game is this? Where did you get that kind of money?" Catherine looked at him, truly looked at him, and for the first time in years, she felt nothing but a distant pity. He was so small, so utterly consumed by the one thing she no longer cared about. "It's not a game, Jonathan," she said, her voice cool and steady. "It's just my life now. Your life." "What life?" he sputtered. "The last I heard, you were selling paintings to make rent. How do you go from that to this?" He gestured wildly at the room of diners who were now enjoying a meal on her dime. This was the moment, the final piece of the puzzle she had kept hidden for 3 years, the ultimate twist that would reframe his entire understanding of the world he thought he dominated. "You were right about one thing, Jonathan," she began, her tone conversational. "There was no money in my little charity project. At least not at first. It took work. It took investment. The painting you so kindly let me keep was a good start." His eyes widened slightly, a flicker of memory. "That thing, that couldn't have paid for all this?" "No, it didn't," she agreed. "It paid for the servers, the first 2 developers, and an office the size of a closet. The rest—" She paused, letting the suspense build. "The rest came from the profits." He stared at her blankly. "Profits? What profits? What are you even doing?" Catherine allowed a small, genuine smile. It wasn't triumphant, but it was deeply satisfied. "I built the thing you said was impossible. My little computer club, as you called it." She looked him directly in the eye and delivered the final blow. "My name is Katherine Pierce, and I am the founder and CEO of Terra Verde." If the announcement about paying for the restaurant had been a lightning strike, this was the earthquake that followed, cracking the very foundations of Jonathan's world. His jaw didn't just drop, it seemed to unhinge. The blood drained so completely from his face that for a moment, Catherine worried he might actually faint. "Terra Verde," he whispered the name, tasting like poison on his tongue. "No, no, that's impossible. The founder is anonymous. They use a pseudonym." "A necessary precaution at first," Catherine said. "I didn't want the distraction." Jonathan stumbled back a step, his mind reeling frantically, trying to connect the dots. Terra Verde wasn't just some successful app. It was a phenomenon. It was the white whale his venture capital firm, Northgate Capital, had been hunting for months. They were desperate to get in on the next round of funding. It was the deal that Jonathan's own boss, Mr. Peterson, had personally tasked him with. His entire career trajectory, his upcoming annual bonus, his very reputation at the firm was tied to securing a meeting with the mythical, untouchable founder of Terra Verde. And he had just spent the evening telling her she couldn't afford bread. The Northgate pitch. He stammered, his eyes wide with horror. "The proposal for the Series C funding round. I've been sending emails for 6 weeks. To an address. An address for the founder's office." "I know," Catherine said quietly. "I've been reading them. They're very persistent." The full catastrophic scale of his miscalculation crashed down on him. He hadn't just insulted his ex-wife. He had insulted the single most important business contact of his entire career. He had called her a failure to her face, while simultaneously begging her through anonymous emails to make him rich. The irony was so potent, so devastating, it was almost poetic. He looked at her, at the woman in the simple black dress he had dismissed as a rounding error, and he finally saw her. He saw the power, the intelligence, the sheer indomitable will he had been too blind and arrogant to ever recognize. And in that moment, he knew he was ruined. The revelation hung in the air between them, thick and suffocating. Jonathan stared at Catherine, his mind a maelstrom of panic and regret. The architect of his potential salvation and the architect of his public humiliation were the same person. He had flown too close to the sun, and the sun had turned out to be the woman he'd thrown away. Kate. Catherine, I didn't know, he stammered, taking a clumsy step toward her, his hands outstretched in a desperate, pleading gesture. My God, if I had known, if you had known what Jonathan. Catherine asked, her voice cutting through his panic like ice, that I was successful, that I had money. Would you have been kinder? Would you have treated me like a human being instead of a piece of dirt on your shoe? Yes, of course. No, this is a misunderstanding, he babbled, his usual slick composure completely shattered. He was a drowning man, and the water was of his own making. From across the restaurant, Brittany, having seen the colour drain from Jonathan's face and the raw panic in his eyes, finally decided to intervene. She marched over her heels, clicking angrily on the polished floor. What is going on? She demanded, directing her fury not at Jonathan, but at Catherine. What did you say to him? Catherine simply looked at her, a silent, unimpressed gaze that seemed to take in Brittany's expensive dress, her perfect makeup, and dismiss it all as irrelevant. I was just catching up with my ex-husband, Catherine replied coolly. We were discussing business opportunities. Business, Jonathan croaked, seizing the word like a life raft. Yes, the deal. The Northgate deal. Catherine, we have to talk. My proposal. It's solid. It's the best offer you'll get. We can make billions together, like we should have. The audacity of it was breathtaking. In the span of 30 seconds, he had gone from insulting her to trying to leverage their painful past into a business partnership. Catherine let out a short, sharp laugh. It was not a sound of mirth, but of disbelief. Together, Jonathan, there is no we, there is no together. You made your choice 3 years ago in our kitchen. You chose a 5-year plan that didn't include me. She turned her gaze to Brittany, who looked confused and angry. And I believe you were a key feature of that plan. How's it working out for you, Brittany? Flushed, speechless. The Northgate proposal is off the table, Catherine stated, her voice leaving no room for negotiation. Effective immediately. I will not under any circumstances do business with a man who holds so little respect for others, especially not for me. Jonathan's face crumpled. No, you can't do that. This deal is my life. Peterson will kill me. Catherine, please. He actually reached out to grab her arm. Catherine flinched back, a spark of her old fear mixing with her new strength. Before she could react, Mr. Giordano materialized at her side, his presence calm but immovable. Is there a problem here, Ms. Pierce? He asked, his eyes fixed on Jonathan. Mr. Caldwell was just leaving, Catherine said firmly. No, I'm not leaving, Jonathan insisted, his voice rising to a pathetic whine. This is we have to talk. The sight was truly pitiful. The once mighty financial analyst, the king of his own small universe, was begging in the middle of a 5-star restaurant. The other diners were now shamelessly watching the drama unfold. It was better than any show in town. So Mr. Giordano said, his voice dropping to a low, menacing tone. I believe Ms. Pierce has made her wishes clear. I suggest you return to your table, or I will have you removed from the premises. The threat of being physically ejected was the final humiliation. Defeated Jonathan, deflated. The fight went out of him, replaced by the hollow emptiness of absolute ruin. He stared at Catherine one last time, his eyes pleading, but he saw no mercy in hers. He saw only closure. He turned and shuffled back to his table, a broken man. Brittany was already gathering her purse, her face a mask of cold fury. Her evening of hobnobbing had turned into a public spectacle of the most mortifying kind. She shot a venomous glare at Catherine before turning her back on Jonathan, leaving him completely alone at the table, surrounded by the ghosts of the feast he hadn't paid for. Catherine gave a grateful nod to Mr. Giordano. "Thank you." "The pleasure was all mine, Miss Pierce," he said, with a genuine smile. "Truly." She walked toward the grand double doors of the exit. As she passed, the elderly couple who had witnessed the entire arc of the evening raised their glasses to her in a silent, respectful toast. The young tech workers gave her a quiet, awestruck round of applause. She hadn't just paid for their dinner, she had delivered a masterclass in justice. Catherine stepped out into the cool, damp Seattle night. The city lights seemed to shine brighter. She took a deep breath, not of the polluted city air, but of the clean, crisp air of freedom. The ghost was gone. The echoes were silenced. The past was finally and completely behind her. The morning after the Aria Ristorante incident, Catherine awoke not to the expected rush of triumphant adrenaline, but to a profound and unnerving quiet. The storm had passed. The ghost she had carried for 3 years had been confronted, exposed, and had dissipated into nothing more than a pathetic memory. In its place was a strange, hollow stillness. She had won decisively and spectacularly, but the silence that followed felt vast and uncharted. It was the silence of a new beginning, and it was in its own way as intimidating as the battle itself. She went through her morning routine, a brisk run along the waterfront, a simple breakfast of avocado toast and black coffee, feeling like a stranger in her own skin. The anger that had fueled her for so long was gone, and she had to relearn how to move without its weight. Miles away, in a glass tower that scraped the sky, Jonathan Caldwell was experiencing a very different kind of morning. He hadn't slept. His eyes were bloodshot, his hands trembling as he straightened his tie for the 3rd time. He had received a one-line email at 6 a.m. "My office, 8 a.m. sharp. Don't be late. Peterson." He walked into the plush, imposing office of Robert Peterson, the CEO of Northgate Capital, feeling like a condemned man walking to the gallows. Peterson, a formidable man with a reputation for surgical precision in both his investments and his dismissals, was standing by his window, looking down at the city. He didn't turn around. "Tell me about Terra Verde." "Jonathan Peterson," said his voice, deceptively calm. Jonathan's blood ran cold. "Sir, it's the leading platform in the sustainable tech space. Incredible growth completely cornered the market. It's the company I've been pitching for the Series C funding." "I know what it is," Peterson said, finally turning. His eyes were like chips of ice. "What I want to know is about the founder, the brilliant, anonymous, untouchable founder we've been trying to get a meeting with for 6 months. The founder you assured me you were making significant headway with. I've been persistent, sir. The channels are very guarded." Jonathan began, his voice weak. Peterson held up a hand, silencing him. "I got a call last night, Jonathan, from a friend who was dining at Aria Ristorante. He told me the most incredible story. A story about a mysterious tech CEO paying for the entire restaurant. A story about my vice president of acquisitions publicly humiliating himself. And then, this morning, I got an email from the CEO of Terra Verde herself." He walked over to his desk and picked up a single sheet of paper. She introduced herself. "Katherine Pierce. Does that name ring a bell?" Jonathan felt the floor dissolve beneath him. "Robert, I can explain. It's a personal matter." A misunderstanding from years ago. A misunderstanding. Peterson's voice was now laced with a cold fury that was far more terrifying than shouting. You were tasked with landing the single biggest deal in this firm's 5-year plan. You found the person who holds the keys to that kingdom, and you told her she couldn't afford her dinner. You didn't just have a misunderstanding, Jonathan. You walked up to the winning lottery ticket, called it a worthless piece of scrap paper, and tried to light it on fire. In public. I didn't know it was her. Jonathan pleaded desperation, cracking his voice. That's the point. Peterson slammed his hand on the desk, the sound echoing in the silent office. Your job is to see value where others don't. Your job is to build relationships, to show respect, to treat the receptionist with the same courtesy as the CEO. Because you never know who is who. Instead, you acted like a petty, arrogant fool. Your personal life has now cost this firm a catastrophic amount of reputational damage and potentially hundreds of millions of dollars in future earnings. He leaned back in his leather chair, his face a mask of disappointment. Your conduct was antithetical to the ethos of Northgate Capital. Your personal judgment has proven to be a liability we can no longer afford. He slid a folder across the desk. This is your severance package. It is not generous. Security will escort you to your office to collect your personal belongings. You have 10 minutes. Jonathan stared at the folder. His career, his identity, his entire 5-year plan, all of it gone. Evaporated in a single night of hubris. He had been dismissed like a rounding error. Katherine, oblivious to the drama unfolding in Jonathan's office, arrived at Terra Verde. The energy was electric. Her acquisition of their main competitor was the talk of the industry, and her team was buzzing with excitement and pride. She led the morning meeting, her voice steady and her vision clear, outlining the next steps for integration. Watching her team, the bright, passionate people who believed in her and her mission, she felt the strange emptiness begin to fill. This was real. This was what she had built. The noise of her past was finally being replaced by the sound of her future. That afternoon, she met Chloe for lunch. Her friend was practically vibrating with vicarious glee. Spill it. Every single detail, Chloe demanded after they ordered. I want to know the look on his face, and hers. Oh, I bet Brittany looked like she'd swallowed a lemon. Katherine recounted the story, her tone more analytical than triumphant. When she got to the part about revealing who she was, Chloe slammed her hand on the table. Yes. Oh my God. That's better than a movie. So what's next? Are you going to sue him for emotional distress, buy his company and fire him yourself? His company already fired him, Katherine said quietly. Chloe's jaw dropped. No way. How do you know I don't officially? But I will, Katherine said. She took a sip of her iced tea. Their CEO wants a meeting. Robert Peterson from Northgate. Chloe frowned. To do what, Gravel? You're not actually going to meet with them, are you? After Jonathan? After everything, I am, Katherine said simply. Kate. Why? Chloe asked, her voice softening. You don't owe them anything. You won. You can work with any VC firm in the world right now. This isn't about winning anymore, Katherine explained, leaning forward. That part is over. This is about building. Jonathan's proposal, once you strip away all the nonsense, was strategically sound. Northgate has the global infrastructure we need for our next phase of expansion. His personal failure doesn't negate their corporate value. She smiled wryly. He was a terrible husband, but he was on paper a decent analyst. My job now is to make the best decision for my company. And the best decision is to hear them out from a position of absolute power. Chloe stared at her for a long moment, then slowly broke into a wide smile. You're terrifying, you know that. In the best possible way. He tried to ruin your life, and you're turning the wreckage into a business opportunity. That's my girl. Back in her office, the formal email from Robert Peterson was waiting just as she'd predicted. Her assistant Paige stood by, tablet in hand. Katherine read the groveling apology, her expression unreadable. When she reached the line confirming Jonathan's termination, the pang she felt was not for him, but for the ghost of the man she had once loved. The ambitious young man who had somewhere along the way curdled into this bitter, arrogant stranger. It was the final, definitive closing of a book she had been forced to carry for too long. "What are your instructions?" Ms. Pierce Page asked, watching her boss carefully. Catherine turned from the email and looked out at her view. The city wasn't just a landscape anymore. It was a testament. Every building, every street, every light was a reminder that worlds could be built and worlds could be broken by a single decision. Jonathan had made his. Now she was making hers. "Paige," she said, her voice imbued with a new, calm authority, "schedule a video conference with Mr. Peterson for next week. Let his assistant know that my time is limited, so he should be concise." "And the tone?" Paige asked, sensing the importance of this detail. "The tone is that we are a global enterprise, exploring all our options," Catherine said, her eyes fixed on the horizon. "He is not apologizing for a social faux pas. He is making a business pitch to me because his firm is now at a distinct disadvantage. Make sure he understands that." "And Paige." "Yes, Ms. Pierce. When you send the confirmation, make sure you sign it from the office of Katherine Pierce. No more anonymity. The ghost is gone." Paige nodded, a look of profound respect on her face, and left to carry out the orders. Catherine stood alone, the afternoon sun warming her face through the glass. She had paid for dinner to prove a point to a man who didn't matter. But in the process, she had proven to herself that her empire wasn't built on revenge. It was built on resilience, intelligence, and the unwavering belief in a little charity project that was now changing the world. The view from the top was clear, and for the first time she felt she truly deserved it. In the end, Katherine Pierce didn't just pay for dinner. She brought back her own narrative. She reminded a man and a world that a person's worth is not determined by their partner, their income, or the price of their meal. It's forged in silence, in hard work, and in the refusal to be defined by those who try to keep you small. Jonathan's arrogance cost him his dinner, his job, and his future. Catherine's quiet dignity gained her the ultimate prize piece. What did you think of Catherine's ultimate power move? Was it perfect justice or a step too far? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. We read every single one. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and make sure you subscribe to our channel for more true stories of incredible triumphs. Thank you for listening.